Have we got Quentin online? Any democracy? Yeah, great. Thank you. Nice to see you. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started. I know there's a bit to cover off, but before we covered it off, I actually wanted to take a moment at the start to go around this table and just get a sense from the councillors around what they're looking out of trying to get to the Smart Growth Committee in general. For me, it's been like a long reflection on what we're going to highlight and focus on to move forward. I respect there's so many work programs that and train for you guys, but there's also other things that are starting to come to their natural end. So I thought it might be helpful in order to get a general statement from everyone around where their heads are at on what smart growth means and what in 2 and a bit years we can really achieve. So I'm going to start with Melissa, Councillor Wayne.
Yes, actually, I think they kind of already covered it in like the last meeting in terms of talking about how everything's just coming at us at the moment and how we best manage that and use the tools that we've got to push back where we can push back and get better outcomes for the community. So,
nice.
Yeah, so I think it's good to sometimes stop and reflect like that. I'm really keen on us looking at the big picture, longer term. Where is all this going? And yes, I agree entirely. Melissa said that there are things that we need to engage with. Pushing back is the term I fully accept and identify, but sometimes it's actually engaging with the problem and trying to come up with a solution rather than this. So it's for those receiving it, it doesn't feel like pushback. It just feels like engagement and shifting direction, So yeah. But there's a nuance between the two. I think I want us to be seen. So when I was reading the update report on the housing action, there were aspects of that I think we could be better communicating as well, so that we're seen to be engaging constructively to manage growth to some extent, because there are some tendencies that we're seeing that it is and or could be out of control. On the other hand, it's about our role is to certainly manage the consequences. And so we need to be communicating when we, not just when we have a win, but when we're engaging and looking to try and influence things too. I don't know if we're adequately communicating that at the moment. And I think it would be helpful if we did, because communities might then feel like they're being listened to.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying I'm probably way out of my depth when it comes to planning and this whole area of council. It's not strong point, but it's good to be on this committee. And maybe this is a bit too aspirational for this committee, I'm not sure, but when I look at the organisation as a whole, well, the first point I make is everybody that calls me is always complaining about a resource consent or a building consent or something like that, and the process or this or that. And I fully understand there's two sides to every one of those stories, and most people complaining at doing something they obviously shouldn't be doing. But there might be a middle ground there that council can enable some of the right development a bit easier, because I do find the process quite hard. And then, I don't know, what can we do through this committee to make development a bit easier in the right places that fall into the right spatial planning for us, so that we don't have these developers leaning on the fast tracks the way that they do and getting their hands on a bit of land completely outside scope and scale of fast track to lean back on. Whereas, if it was cheaper or quicker or easier or something, I don't know the answers to these things, but in the place that we need to do, and I know that comes down to individual land holding, but I'm just wondering if there's any carrots we can be dangling in those spaces to make it easier to, for the lower hanging fruit for those developers, I suppose. But that could be quite aspirational for this committee. I don't know.
Dream big. Quentin, did you want to add 2 cents?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've got to be careful with change well, open to change, and I think we can do things better. I'm just super worried that we are opening the door for removing the protection that we've had on even the landscapes in our district or the but at the end of the day, what we want is good quality outcomes, and I'm not sure how it's not clear yet how we go about getting good quality urban design outcomes, good quality subdivision design under the new system, and that'll be the challenge, I suppose. That's the thing we need to look to. But probably the single biggest challenge for us at the moment is making sure that we properly understand the costs of development, because that starts to frame what efficient development is, what efficient infrastructure is, what how the costs are distributed, all those sort of things. So I think we need to have a far stronger connection between the costs associated with development, including the downstream costs, because I think that's the one thing we're completely lost on at the moment, is that we're not understanding the consequential costs, particularly on the transport network and things like that. If we can quantify that, then I think we start to paint a better picture of why we're developing where we want to develop under the spatial plans. And the other piece is obviously is making sure we're engaged in the meaningfully in the spatial planning process.
Totally. And to finish off, because I've been thinking about this a lot, as you can imagine, the reason I got into council was because I was just finished work doing shaping our futures stuff with Highways 50-year master plan, and Glover was leading that work, facilitating it. And I think I've tried to interpret his definition of smart growth as around, being creative and forward-thinking versus being reactive. And I've seen a lot, even just how the agendas have evolved, of responding to certain things versus actually showing leadership and we're wanting to head to, and then implementing the tools in order to ensure the outcomes are what we want. I feel like from first principles, we're not aligning incentives with the outcomes. We can have great visions and great plans, but if developers are looking to cut corners, and they can, they always will. New Zealand's got a problem with sprawl because it's always been cheap and easy to develop, and we haven't had the tools to do that. But I think fundamentally we're in a term where we'll see the most transformational change from policy settings around planning, and how we navigate that. We can be quite constructive and effective, or we can let it to overrun us. So I know the dynamic that means it will have to be pliable and work quickly and not be able to have the same level of rigor that we're usually typical to. But I think if we build a strong vision in this committee and find those core values that we can keep referencing, then it'll be a helpful guiding star throughout the whole process. So hoping to be more ambitious, hoping to be more like big thinking and bring things to this committee that feel like they're courageous more so than anything else, and excited to be a part of it. With that, I'll hand it off to you and contextualize that into work streams you got going on.
That's great. Well, essentially, these priorities are essentially my team's work plan. And if I can sort of reflect on our past 3 years of existence as a team, we were created to get sort of more as a reflection of the community's outcome about wanting to not be so developer-led. So, and also to have that internal coordination and external coordination with government to make sure that we were working collectively together to ultimately get the best outcomes possible for our community. And so I've got a team full of people who feel really passionately about that, and it keeps us awake at night and thinking about the ways that we can achieve those outcomes. So, and saying that, so we've got our 12-month program ahead of us, and we've got essentially these are some carry-ons from our spatial plan, being the structure plan. So we've got the Central and South Monica structure plan, just Kerikeri Frankton structure plan, but also at the same time we're implementing the existing structure plans. And so there's some really great case studies of work that we're doing that we would like to just bring forward, just to highlight the interconnection. It's not, we don't just finish with the structure plan, we also want to implement it and get those outcomes we're enabling, but also bringing together the Blue-Green Network and the Climate Biodiversity Plan into that implementation too. At the same time, we're looking at continuous growth and improvement, and we've Cam and my team's created an interim growth model, and we're able to use that in the long-term plan. But also Liz and Robert from P&I are looking at a more system approach and an enduring approach to how we growth model and what we're doing, but also how we work with our external partners to all be on the same page. And that's a critical factor, not just NZTA and health and education, but the energy providers. And what we're also proposing to do is regular monitor of this growth and bring it back to this committee. Regional spatial planning, what we're doing with the other Otago councils, joint housing action plan, and then the advocacy work, and that's where we'll be talking about the fast tracks and those types. So I'll hand over.
I think just before we go into the detail again, I think it's just worth reflecting on so the spatial plan was developed
And
in
it
2021.
it started and adopted in 2021. I think we had a meeting on December in 2017, and I was said, I'm actually going to come and just do this project for 6 months. so here we are still later. So who would have thought that one meeting would have changed the track of my career path, but it's okay. It's been exciting. So in 2021, we had this spatial plan fully adopted, not only by QLDC, but it was endorsed by the Grow Wellfare Partnership and the ministers at that time. So at that time, we had an operating governance group, so we had significant engagement by ministers in that partnership.
So the Grow
Remember the community or the stakeholder engagement, putting tables and putting houses in places. And
We did lots. We had a highly engaged community in that process there.
and central government partners. So the Grow Wellfire Partnership has, there are some councils around New Zealand who have these urban growth partnerships, not everybody does. So it meant that we had government agencies who were responsible for different parts of this around the table as well, and who assisted in developing the spatial plan. So the spatial plan sets out a vision and core values that were agreed with the community and were agreed with central government, which is, that made it quite unique at the time.
In Kaitahu.
In Kaitahu. So what the team has been focused on since then is implementing the spatial plan. The spatial plan had a lot of actions in it, which is what that monitoring report was that we saw in the meeting. What we're wanting to do here is to recognise that we're going into a new phase of growth, amongst other things, for the district, but also a new environment in terms of resource management. So the new planning bill and the push to work on at least a sub-regional basis, if not a regional basis, for some of these, the things that we would have looked just at Queenstown Lakes for in the future. So some of that is reflected in the conversations that you've been part of with the regional deal. So that's very integrated. The work program that the strategic growth team has is very integrated with supporting the regional deal and the implementation of the regional deal once we get to that point in the process. And so I think it's the engagement in that regional spatial planning process is we call it regional spatial planning, but we will have a very strong Queenstown Lakes view in there. That is the place where the vision and values from a growth perspective for our district need to be embedded. So I'm just flagging that because that's clearly something that's come through in terms of what you want the committee's priorities to be, and the spatial plan is where that comes to life. So I think the conversations we have about this going forward need to be really grounded in that spatial planning process. Now that is going to be not necessarily, Anita will get to this when she gets to this part, but how others have done spatial plans versus how we did our spatial plan in the past, quite different. Ours took a very broad, holistic view. Like if you look at the spatial plan, the outcomes and the strategies in there are a lot broader than what other people have focused on, and we want to ensure that we maintain that more holistic view as we go into the next stage of spatial planning.
the reforms are essentially pushing us towards that. A lot of the future development strategies were more planning document, you know, zoning made for that type of, but we've built in sort of like the regenerative, the tourism plan, you know, we've got the economic diversification plan, and we're trying to embody it overall outcomes, not just, you know, across the whole system.
So I assume, you know, that everybody when they come onto council familiarise themselves with the spatial plan. But I think as we go into this next phase, it'd be really good for, you know, us internally and for you guys to kind of maybe have another read of it as we're thinking about what we want the future to be, because there's some really good stuff in there that actually I think we want to just lean into more, or look at how we take it to the next level, because we've taken a lot of, we've done a lot of actions in there, but it was always intended to then, okay, well, what's next to get to these outcomes? And so I think that's part of the conversation we'll be having here is, well, we're talking about, we've got a different vision, or we're saying this is the right vision, what we need are the actions that are going to make it happen, and those actions might look different now, particularly as we work more closely with Central Otago and places like that. But we also want to report on it differently. So we had all those actions, we've done this reporting. What we want to talk about today is what are the things that you want the team to focus on in the next 12 months, so we can just really focus on those things to get that momentum forward.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to keep brain dump of my thinking in this space before we go into what the things are.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it, mate.
Thanks for that. That really helps. So within the regional spatial plan, then, and let's not, you know, without the sub-regional potentiality, but is it anticipated that there will be, you know, say Queensland Lakes is going to be a key part of that? And of course, will, but other councils might have different views on that. But does each local authority, within the provisions for the direction the spatial plans are supposed to take, that there should be specificity for each local authority and its strategic interests within that bigger spatial plan? There is.
It certainly allows for that.
Yeah, it does allow for it, but I don't know if it will be district. It might be more sub-regional. There might be, and the problem that we have is the select committee report was due out, and I don't think it hasn't been released yet. So once that's released, we'll have more details. No, I've been waiting. I've been hanging out for it. And then once that drops, then we'll be able to have. No, but essentially what our discussions is they do want an overall regional plan, but there could be some sub-regional components, particularly with Central Otago, housing affordability, growth, you know, there will have to be those splits.
We have certainly been given very strong messaging from the centre.
It's funny watching you try and navigate.
That they would expect, and they think that there is allowance in the planning, what they're intending to put forward in the Planning Act, that we would have a small focus.
Right.
Yeah.
So, because the other
That
question.
there are some bits, but most of it will be here.
Right, okay. So because in these conversations going forward, particularly in the context of local government reform.
Yes.
And I don't want to use the term head start because it doesn't help, but that there was some suggestions that we could be working with at least parts of Southland in that process. They've given a hard no to that. That's their call. But the reality is that, and this is very different approaches to how developers take fast track. So we've got some fast track applicants who would regard it to be entirely secret. And Q might have just had a conversation about this, and then there are others like Kingston Village who are totally open because they see themselves a part of the community. And that there is another developer who is currently entirely secret. There will possibly be a community at the south of Lake Wakatipu that is bigger than Queenstown in the next 20 years. So how do we take those cross-boundary issues into account that are not currently in what we would call Otakau?
Yeah.
The bill that it does enable us to work with Southland, and we have raised, so as an officers, we have raised, once we get a better understanding regionally, we do have that, and also for us, potentially the West Coast.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple, and the same, there'll be other places within Otago, so we have acknowledged, we don't know the answer yet, but we know that we do need to work with those, and those, in particular, those areas, we could, in particular, you know, the Tiana, the Milford
Yeah.
Sound link,
The one economy.
we've got, yeah. So that has been raised. We don't have the answer yet, but that's a live issue that we'll
Cool.
need to work through.
Certainly the messaging that we've got is that the legislation around this is intended to be flexible enough to be able to have chapters, if you like, that are focused at a smaller level, that have links outside the region, that, you know, that's the messaging we've had in the discussions.
Sure, so there could even then be chapters that span boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Or links to
Yeah.
areas out here like north.
yeah, so we may have an Otago regional spatial plan, but then there may be specific links.
Yeah.
There could be, you know, network links, roading. And when we did the original spatial plan, we had acknowledged those links. Because particularly, you know, the two area, because we found that the Albert Town Bridge, a phenomenal amount of tourism spend actually crossed over that bridge. Yeah, so that was really interesting. So there's lots of connections.
Yeah, they're not going to the beach park necessarily.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
And so that's why we have partnered with Central Otago with the regional deal, because from an economy perspective, and you know, certain parts of Central Otago are very connected. We're very connected with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's, I mean, and I feel like the presentation is like a way to facilitate conversation. So I hope we're all good that this is more loose and fluid.
And that's exactly what we've made it for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and so it's much appreciated. Just take the stress off that, so you're not going crap. There's 12 more slides coming. For my peace of mind, I think go for it. Like something about this stuff too. No, I think there's always stuff, and the same like conversations with amalgamation of what makes sense at different levels. When you're looking at waste and recycling, it elevates pretty far up. When you're looking at sports plans, obviously Central Otago is a huge key partner in that, and public transport. When you look at social infrastructure and what the community wants and sees in their backyards, we go from big to small quite quickly. And I do think a lot of these reforms are trying to keep in the back of my mind first principles, what's going to be best for the community, what they're interested in, and how they're going to interface with the future, whatever mechanism that's going to be, in order to be involved in whatever their outcome is. And I think, taking the approach of the Citizens Assembly, as much as the part that stresses me is the we're doing all this great work, we have this, vision, and then all of a sudden it's completely undermined by one developer who has the, legal tenacity to really bolt through whatever work we've done on it. But I do think that, a big part of this is selling the vision, to Mitch's point around actually having a tool that communicates what we're trying to do really well, so that there is buy-in from everybody in the community, from future developers. People can see how it works on the holistic level, how it interfaces with everything else. We get out of this fractured thinking. A question I want to pitch back to you in this forum is more that, we've had some, sunsetting of some of the old work that's been done, and reflecting on that, it's great to celebrate what's worked, but if you feel like there are things that didn't work, or the reason we couldn't get to the objectives that we could, based on most likely things out of our control. So it comes to the bottom of this presentation, talk about advocacy. I think at a time when we are not empowered to solve all of these issues ourselves, but we have a role to play as leaders of this community to set the right path forward. We think we could be stronger in influencing what we need in order to create the outcomes that our community desires. Big, complicated question, but what do you think hasn't worked in the last 3 years?
One thing one thing that I think we do need to, I agree with Councillor Mitchell, we do need to celebrate things and be clear when things have worked. It's hard because I'm a half glass full person, so even if something hasn't worked, I think of a way that we can. But I think one thing that I'll just slightly divulge and then I'll come back. But I think one thing that I have really seen is the strength of having an urban growth partnership has been phenomenal. A lot of stuff happens that we don't know about and we're not aware about, but we get sent it and we need, unfortunately, some of that we keep in confidence, but we have a lot of people who understand our challenges and our problems, who are advocating. So it's not just us advocating, we have them advocating on our behalf in platforms. So I think that is something that we aren't, not necessarily aware of, but is happening all the time for us. I think things that we could do better is, I think we've done lots of these plans. Now we need to actually bring them together. So we've got an economic diversification plan that says we're trying to attract those 4 industries, but actually how does that then translate into the regional spatial plan? What do we need to then do to those industries to make that happen? So we have a lot of, we have a high understanding of it. How do we bring that together to actually get those outcomes? Because even, we've got a joint housing action plan, we've got an economic diversification plan, we've got a tourism destination management plan that are quite separate, but actually when you look at them, housing is the fundamental thing that stops a lot of things from happening. How do we bring all those findings together and make that cohesive story? And I think that's the criticality of the next step of the regional spatial planning, is bringing that together. And same with our infrastructure. Yes, we've got a lot of zone development, but what's holding us actually up is the provision of infrastructure, and how do we work together and highlight that as a massive constraint to our network. And I think that's critical.
I mean, yeah, this department in general is the connector for a whole bunch of different facets of what council does. And, I hear in the back of my mind, Quentin saying, costs, growth pays for growth. This integration with the fact of, yes, infrastructure is really crucial, and yes, it's important that we upfront it, but it's also important that the community don't wear the cost of someone else's development, and that things aren't socialised when it goes wrong, and there's accountability long term. And I agree completely. It's the tools that we have in order to compile it, because every time you go to developer, you should read 6 different multiple 100-page documents, and then you'll understand what we're trying to say. It's not good enough, basically. And I do think, there's probably scope in this committee to really work on that tool, or that sort of mechanism that does actually bring all of that planning together into something that's tangible, that is done probably by, a graphic designer more so than, a planner. When it comes to,
What are you trying to say about that?
Definitely a graphic designer over
having a degree in design, and just that's not how you present a hierarchy of information. That just even more than 10 words in a sentence, people switch off. We're in an environment where you get 2 seconds before someone scrolls on. And I do think that, we need to set, clear direction, and that has enormous value that's really intangible. And often we get into these environments where we constantly measure stuff that we can measure, whether it's, because it's quantifiable, because there's a number to it. Then you get the arts and culture community coming in and saying, oh, we're a number 2 on this and a 75% of this, but it's we sort of know, but it's sort of hard to say. So yeah, there's real scope in there. You can go for it. I could dominate this conversation. I'm just aware of that. So throw it a penny.
I could also dominate this conversation.
Wow.
The thing for me is being able to turn all of that good stuff and relationships into investment from government alongside our investment, and being able to keep our investment consistent and focused on the future. So it's knowing what the problem is, knowing what the solution is, being able to implement the solution when the solution costs money, and having the costs fall on the right parties, or just recognising that there is a cost and someone has to pay it. And so how do you do that, and then how do you keep focused on it and keep the investment going? So that's that's why a lot of those strands we've been talking about as we go through the LTP have been, it all comes back to actually how do you get the right parties to pay? Who are the right parties, and what's the right investment? And then how do we keep it there? I don't know that we'll get the perfect story through the LTP conversation, because it's difficult, and it's not just us, it's our government partners. So we've developed these amazing relationships through the Urban Growth Partnership, and we've had a lot of policy success through that space. And we've even had some investment. But the recognition of the amount of investment required to provide the infrastructure for both our community, the developers, and central government, we actually need to get that full picture on the table, and then map out how we're going to get there.
Yeah,
So that's the bit for me that, where there's, you know, there needs to be a focus
Yeah.
in the next.
That's
I also think the trade-offs, I think
Yeah.
when we are making decisions, we're making trade-offs and then we're not thinking about what does that do to the big picture. And I think having some clarity about that, like maybe not investing in a certain piece of infrastructure, actually that restricts the whole entire network, which then has implications for NZTA and Ministry of Education. So I think making sure that we really understand what we're trading off and our role is in this entire system, because we do play a really important role, and there's some decisions, you know, that we've made in the past that if we had that information, we may have not made them, you know, so
totally.
just having that clarity. So when we're making decisions, we fully are aware of all the implications, so then we're making it not with that in mind.
Yeah. I'm aware both Heath and Quentin have to leave some point halfway through, so I want to hand the floor to Heath. And Quentin, you're still there? I can't see you. So. He's gone? All right. So, I mean, go for it. Sorry.
Just listening to the conversation, we've got too much to add. I don't think we it was too big to me.
One thing I'll add,
Yeah, go for it.
just on that last point. When I was listening to the presentation, Queenstown Cable one night, we need actual data and solid projections about, you know, where this is all going, and that proposed, and to be able to make informed decisions about whether proposed solutions are actually going to improve things, or whether the consequences of them will be, they'll make a change, sure, but the impact, as you were kind of alluding to previously, could be quite different and unintended. So we need to understand the systems that we're working within, and just making individual decisions without understanding that those big system issues is going to keep resulting in unintended consequences arising. I mean, things like that can offer a huge potential solution as long as it's done right. But you need to understand what right looks like, and that's not easy. And that's where having that big open approach to spatial planning is good on one level, literally and figuratively, but then you've got to get down to nuts and bolts too.
But I would like to say that I kind of disagree with that to an extent. Like, yeah, we can sit here and just get more information and get more information and get more information. That's what I feel like we've done since 2014.
Yeah, I hear what
Like,
you're saying.
eventually we actually have to get on and say it's not going to be perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect. You're going to win something, but yeah, I mean, the cable cars are different prospect than, you know, where we've got the housing growth and infrastructure and things that potentially. But yeah, I don't know. Like, we've got a problem. We kind of need to just say yes occasionally as well. Or
Sure. Yeah, don't disagree with that.
like we can, you know, there'll always be another report, there'll always be another consultant getting paid, but nothing will change. And that's my biggest fear, I suppose.
And this is where, like, the investment is really important, because I'm just using this totally hypothetical example. Let's say you put in a cable car, and you put it in before there was housing development to the place where you wanted the housing development to happen.
Yeah.
And that then enabled the housing development, didn't cause a transport solution, and it could go where you wanted it to because you planned it in advance and you put it there before the housing development went in. But to do that, someone has to make a risky decision to invest this is the right solution on the data we have available now, and to make the investment up front when you haven't got the zoning. Well, you might have the zoning, but you don't have the developers. When you don't have certainty over the solution, and so we end up in this situation where it has to go so far before you have enough evidence to say we can invest in the thing. But then by the time you get to that point, by the time you then go through the investment cycle, then you've got a big problem. And actually,
Then you need another two.
then you need another two. So like NZTA is a really good example of that, because historically their funding models are based on demand kind of triggers having been hit already.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have a problem to justify the solution. And for placements like here, that then can have significant flow-on implications.
Yeah, the political shorthand for that is got to break it to make it.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the most worrying thing about realizing, from my perspective, I had led community-led master planning in a way that was, constructive around growth to go, let's go long term, let's go, it's a big flat valley. What's going to be the likely thing, but also how can we manage stormwater, social infrastructure, all of the connections and other stuff. So it was easy to understand what people wanted. They want a good place to live. That's who we're in service for. When I went to developers, it was easy to understand what they wanted because they wanted to be profitable. It was a huge risk up front to, state what they were wanting to do, and they needed to make sure that they made return on investment. It'd be nice if it didn't suck at the end of it. And so, so the third person was council, and part of the, intention of even coming in here is to understand the big complicated machine that it is. And when you're in here, you realize, wow, not only is it massively complicated and fractured, it's actually relying on multiple other partners, several other partners in order for it to function. And so it's like someone's filling up the gas of it, thousands of kilometers away. And I guess that's part of the nuance that we always suffer and know the detail of, but the community can only feel the outcome. And so they'll never know the why. We've been part of processes that go, we hear what you're saying, we want to reflect your views, but we don't have the tools to do that. And I guess reflecting on how we can be more effective in that type of space where there isn't the full authority to create fit for purpose, but there is a space for leadership. I think that's what it keeps coming back to, is that if we're the facilitator for all these conversations, I'm more than happy for a third party to come in and build mass rapid transport that's offline, and we can facilitate it and make it work that's going to be best for the community. I'm more than happy to host conversations around housing deliver it and other aspects. Again, more just sort of virtue signaling, but I've got notes here, so maybe that'll help be constructive. When it comes to housing affordability, somebody who's advocated a lot around, people trying to get in, first-time buyers, getting into housing and looking at this whole, I see housing like oxygen, growth of housing like oxygen, where if you don't have enough of it, it's suffocating, and it absolutely will cause a massive problem with housing affordability. But too much of it doesn't solve any problem. Having lots of oxygen, it's not that big a deal. So the point being, when I look at what has been done in JHAT, I feel like a lot of it's focused on houses, but not any of it has focused on land. And I look at council as the provider of zoning for land, and a lot of when we reflect on the spatial plan, I don't disagree with where the land should be developed. And when I listen to Quentin's points around special housing areas or fast tracks, they don't actually change the price, they just change where development happens. So it's location specific. And I constantly advocate for, disincentives for land banking, but that feels like the obvious thing that's missing in all of these strategies, is that we have great areas that are prime for development, that rely on people who have monopolized the market, and they have no incentive to develop it or move it on. Has that come up in conversations?
This is actually one of the actions of the JHIP. There was a particular action relating to that for Emily to look
What
at.
prohibits it? Because again, some of these things are levers and mechanisms that are in other departments, and some of them are more holistic than that.
Sorry, do we mean an incentive or a disincentive?
All these things that are, I suppose, in council's control, like for instance, rates. We could look at our rating system. So what Emily discovered is, we were looking at from a housing perspective, but that would involve us looking at our rates overall. So it's a massive system one. You've got, these things that we could do, as Councillor Copeland said, we could offer pathways for people who are in our priority development areas, not, just saying, I know that, for instance, Auckland, they have a team of people that really assist developers in areas that they want development and they go through. It's not, you still need to follow all the processes, it's just that there's a team and they're dedicated to that sort of way of operating. But yeah, there was a specific action in the JHAP regarding that.
So looking at the priorities for the next 12 months, though, we could make that a priority, is to do an investigation about what are all of the tools within our control that we could use to either incentivise that development or disincentivise land banking. But what you raise is exactly the point that actually kind of is underpinned by what the data is showing, is that, and it's been the basis of our discussions with the government on the regional deal. I don't think that part's confidential, no. In terms of the tools that work elsewhere don't work here.
Yeah.
Building more and more houses, which is essentially the government's housing policy. We build, we issue the highest number of consents per capita, and have, us and Selwyn, sometimes it's them, sometimes it's us. And there's only 2 places that issue more consents, gross consents, being Christchurch and Auckland. So, only 2 places in New Zealand build more houses than us.
Yeah.
We build more houses, they don't get affordable. So that's why actually the focus on the inclusionary zoning type bills, so that you can get land to the community housing trust or a community housing trust to have secure, long-term, affordable housing is a solution that for Queenstown is what we want to lean into. So this is really kind of narrowing the focus of what is within our control as to what can we do to advance that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Alongside, I think that's probably a good additional priority to add to this, which is to actually do a proper investigation of all of those tools, the ones that are available through Fiona's team, the ones that are available through rates. So when we talk about the rates review as part of the LTP, I think you've got the 3rd session on that on July.
Yeah.
That will be considering, for example, land value.
Yeah, no, I know. And I don't want to say.
So we have kind of unique.
Yep.
Can I just
Go
make,
for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel free.
and just in terms of what Councillor Higgins was saying before as well, with the development side of what you were just talking about, Penny, the whole development is actually processes as resource consents, building consents, but actually there's also the other end of the resource consent process. So beyond my team in terms of particularly in the subdivisions and development, so you've still got all your engineering approvals and you've got your technicals, and actually that's the bit where the developments quite often get a bit stuck in terms of delivery, because it again comes back to the whole infrastructure issue. And so at that point they're doing a whole lot of the actual physical infrastructure. They're designing it, they're building it, they're needing that to all be signed off properly by council in order to ensure that we are investing in council assets that are suitable for the community and the council to take over. So at the moment we don't really have a problem getting consents through. It's more the information and that end of the development, with the developers coming back around that, and so that's that whole development life cycle. So in terms of the actual resource consents, building consents, they are flow through quite easily. And then developers get caught when they actually have to stump up doing the infrastructure they need to do in those bits and pieces to actually finish those developments and get them ready. And quite often at that point, it's when the community and the first homeowners are waiting for titles and things that aren't popping out because the developers haven't done that part well enough, or to a standard that we can take in terms of vesting. And so I think that that's just one of the areas that I know Hayden Beard, who looks after that team, is very aware of making sure that everything coming at us. So, Homestead Bay, for instance, which has been given fast track approval, that won't come through my team likely anymore, but it will come through Hayden's team, and suddenly he's got a wave of infrastructure stuff going to be hitting his team with regards to how that's then, getting through those nuances of actually that physical works and stuff. So I think that's quite a good understanding to have of that whole cycle. It's easy to sort of say resource consents, but actually it's the whole development cycle.
Do you feel we as an organisation are pragmatic in that space, in that development delivery space, like to try to encourage those developers in the places they should and make it kind of easy in the real world? I mean, not your team, obviously, but.
Well, no, but I do sit within planning and development as a manager, and so certainly I'm across all that stuff as well. And I think, yes, we do. And it depends quite often on the consultants, the local consultants you're dealing with, more so than the actual developers. So Homestead Bay is probably not a good example because Hanley's is typically a very good developer and delivers what it needs to deliver and deliver well. We have some other developers that aren't necessarily as invested as what they are, and then and you've got some of the local consultancies that are advising those around the level of quality and infrastructure and what they need to do. And then, you know, ideally all developers will try and cut corners a little bit in terms of saving money. And I guess, yes, we are pragmatic, and Dave Wallace, who was here earlier, is very much a pragmatic GM. But it is also about making sure that we've got the quality, because council's taking over those assets and therefore the community and the ratepayer.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's that balance. But yes, I can assure you, we definitely are trying. You know, it's something that we are conscious of. Yeah.
I hear examples like sort of outside that infrastructure space, like you need a landscape plan signed off, and then I've heard people saying, well, you have it planted out before you can start construction. It's like, well, we can't construct if we plant all the landscape, and just things like that. Where
So
we used to get those frustrations, and I'm like, well, that can't be real.
So typically that will just relate to, so that doesn't relate to urban development, big subdivision development. Those examples will literally relate to your two-lot developments and happening in the Mokatapu Basin, in the area that has landscape protections and those things. And so in terms of those consents being able to develop that land, which isn't easy under our plan, they do need to plant quite often to screen those building platforms before they occur. So what you're describing in terms of the area that's zoned for development, in terms of all the urban stuff, isn't subject to any of those landscape type rules at all. So that's not precluding that. It literally is those 1 or 2 lots, or where people are trying to do that rural residential subdivisions, I guess, in places like Mokatapu and Ngāwhakauta.
Or presumably where the developers themselves have put those rules in, like in Jack's Point.
Yeah, although I don't think, yes, you're right, Penny, and there are some developments like that, although I don't think Jack's Point and that are more controlled by the visuals of what the buildings look like. But yeah, there is, no, you're right, they do have those little landscape side of things, which are Jack's Point, not us.
Yeah.
But they started off with that kind of rural visitor subdivision back in the day when most of that was landed. It was very different to Henley's Farm or Chateau Country, which were definitely more pure urban. Darwin Partners had a much bigger vision for a sort of rural landscapey style subdivision with golf courses and things. So
Yeah, I mean, I've also been aware of, you know, how because I've talked to John Darby and Mike Coburn, and they've offered to have some influence, whether it's, you know, around, I keep saying, well, talk to some of the other developers around and try and reinforce how this works on the grander scheme of things, because the whole nuance to council taking ownership over stuff is the developer goes, great, that's all done. And if there's any long-term effects from there, the community is going to pay for it, which is the part I see with stormwater in Wanaka, where, you know, in multiple occasions, we're paying millions of dollars to compensate for the lack of a developer building a fit-for-purpose stormwater solution that will, you know, if not solved, degrade the health of the lake. So, yeah, this all feels incredibly wide, and I'm also aware that, you know, we're trying to create some structure around what the work plans and priorities are. The only sort of guiding evidence or examples I've seen on some aspects around leadership in this space is, one, you first focus on the problems you hear about. So highlighting all of the complaints that are most common, bringing them to a head and going, these are the 3 things we get time and time again. And then once you've solved those, which might be, you know, the slight annoyances from developers that just always irritate them in the back of their mind, that allows the space to then talk about the bigger things. And I guess it's finding out from, you know, without having to go to the biggest pain points, how to be most effective at delivering on what the community are wanting. I mean, from my position, again, to reference your point around the spatial plan, I don't think we're misaligned when it comes to the priorities of where we think we're going. I think we don't have the tools in order to create that as the outcome. So investing in the tools and the systems that allow us to be able to deliver on what we know the community needs, I think is going to be obviously the priority of where to spend the effort, and part of those tools is advocacy. I want to sort of like change the power dynamic and go to, how do you guys think councillors and the mayor can be more effective politically at advocating for the needs of what this committee is trying to do? And what do you think, you know, how do you think we can be more effective in that space?
I think we need to be a bit more focused on that.
Okay, go for it.
Because there's different areas. So we've got half an hour left. Is
Yeah.
there any of these topics you guys need specific direction from the committee on?
Yeah, so we, so just before that,
Because one of the items in here is advocacy, so where
Yeah,
are the
yeah,
areas of
yeah.
focus?
Yeah,
Yeah.
these are, all of these things that we've got here, I mean, regional spatial planning is a government thing, but the growth, the structure planning, joint housing action plan and the advocacy, these are all problems that our team and council hear regularly, like how are we dealing with growth, how are you monitoring it, and then, you know, we're wanting to make sure that our community needs are put into plan. So a lot of this is actually addressing those key problems that we're seeing. I don't know, should we run through these and then think
Yeah,
about, but
yeah.
I think a big thing is I know that the strength in all of us being on the same page and making sure that we're testing ideas and making sure that we're getting our facts collectively all the same, and so that when there are opportunities to advocate in these spaces, we're giving the best advocacy possible we can. And I think making sure that we have all the correct data and we're all collectively on the same page is really important to that.
So perhaps in each of these topics,
Yeah.
we can just identify what would the useful advocacy thing be, because like if we're talking about affordable housing,
Yeah,
I think the useful thing is actually reinforcing the message about inclusionary zoning and how the other things, not that the government's policies don't work, but that we have a different market which has different forces at play, and the way to move the dial to get affordable housing is this thing, and that we can provide you with material to do that. And I think look for opportunities to do that advocacy, and that we do it, so to your point, we're doing it in a consistent way. Yes.
Yeah, and the challenge I sort of also want to feed back is, you know, we keep having this conversation about being on the same page. I want to create a single page.
yeah,
And if you were to try and condense thousands of pages, years and years of work and tens of thousands of hours into a single page, what would it sit on and what would be displayed in there? Because again, we struggle because we know how prolific and widespread and integrated all of these issues are. But if we're communicating it to people, we've got an elevator pitch.
Yeah.
That's better. All right, well, let's run through this. And I appreciate you probably need to leave.
So I'm gonna have to do sorry.
But we'll run through.
Sorry, Liz, we're just going to give a quick update on the structure plan, so then we can highlight, and Ken's online too. Essentially what we're just saying here is we just thought we'd report back on the key milestones and get your inputs in strategic direction through the process. So if we wanted to send on to Liz.
Yeah, so this is getting into a bit of detail, that's okay. But this is just to give you an update on where we're at with the ecological assessment for the Wanaka structure plan. So we're undertaking two key pieces of work at the moment, and that's hazards and ecological. And that's to try and start to inform how the structure plan, where its sort of opportunities are and where its constraints are, if you like. So they have produced a draft plan, although it will remain kind of draft till November. And the reason for that is they have undertaken a site visit back in May. But because it's pretty much winter, there's no summer plants out there for them to look at. So the plan is that they'll go back out in November, which will then enable us to finalise the report. But we should have a draft one as to what our findings have been from our ecological workshop that we did with a number of interested stakeholders in the Wanaka area. As well as some initial site visits. And so those, I think what we've got from that, especially from both the site visit and the workshop, is that the Wanaka area, no surprises probably, is that it's already been very highly modified. There's actually not a great deal that we could find, or not we, I did a small site visit, but what Fideca could find to, you know, you might want to protect. But he did find that it provided some really good opportunities to protect some important values, especially around the lake edge and our waterways and springs. There's a lot of those in Wanaka, and some remnant vegetation. Whilst being able to use kind of our future growth structure planning to look at maybe restoring ecological function that probably hasn't been there for the last 100, 150 years. That's something that came quite clear from Katahu, as well as the stakeholders that we met with. There was a really strong desire from those stakeholder workshops for a very holistic assessment, especially around things like water, whether it's the rivers and the lakes, to connections through from the mountains to those lakes and rivers, as well as the landforms. The landforms came quite a bit, and I won't be able to go into detail of how to explain those right now, because it's a lot of technical terms, but it was actually really interesting finding more about the history of the landforms of Wanaka and how they differ in certain places and what we might want to look at protecting. So that's kind of where we got to with ecological. So next time we come to see you, we should have a draft report that we'll be able to share.
Nice. I did have a conversation yesterday with Wanaka. They were looking at this report, with Michaela, and going, where do they fit into the process of this, wanting to daylight that, obviously we're trying to integrate this planning and leverage that expertise. How do you see, at what point in the process can we do that, and where do you see it most appropriate to?
Yeah. Well, Wine Wanaka was at the workshop, and I'm meeting with Wine Wanaka tomorrow as well. I think it's slightly different from the one construction plan, but it's also kind of intertwined. And then really, I guess, through our future workshops and stakeholder workshops that we'll be doing as we engage with the public, is bringing them in and making sure that their values are as embedded as others, and also that blue-green network plan. Everyone's got very shared and similar values through that. So really, that structure plan process will be about trying to combine all of that together.
Yeah.
But we are chatting.
Yeah, all I need from you is confidence that, it's an integral thing. They know anecdotally that that's the case, so it's good to just daylight it. Yeah, so I appreciate that.
That's the question.
Go for it.
So, when you're about ecology, and I get all of the Indigenous ecological plans, particularly where opportunities are to recreate what has been lost. But in those considerations, because there has been some discussion of this, particularly in Wanaka, and initiatives in that area where food resilience comes in as well, where fruit trees and community gardens and opportunities to compost in the community are factored in, and because it is ecology, that's not traditionally regarded as such. Or how is that factored in anyway in these discussions?
Yes, but what do they call it when it's not exotic? The exotic one's interesting, because the ecological report, if we sort of try and strip it back to, I suppose, the RMA and the MPS on Indigenous biodiversity, it doesn't, and Anna knows more about this than me, but it's really looking more at the Indigenous side of things and protecting things that have a biodiversity value, and there is a framework for that within the IB that I don't really think touches on the exotics. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't factor it in or couldn't factor it in as part of our structure planning process, depending on its, as long as there's nothing in there that the district plan has said that shouldn't be there, for example. But yeah, I think it's just working with those groups and finding areas where, there's some areas already existing, so it could be around protecting those spaces. There's a lot of work that's been done on those creeks and coming through, and it's just bringing all of that together.
In terms of the fruit planting and things like that, the structure plan made a signal, this is what we've had in the community. And so when we're saying open space and parks, then at that next layer, then once we receive the park, we can look at what is the role of this park, and it could be composting, fruit trees, that's an additional layer. So that actually, food resilience was a massive topic that came out, particularly in the Upper Clutha in the spatial plan too.
Cool. Thanks.
So sorry, in the new planning environment, so under the planning bill, can we still require these kinds of assessments? Or will the environment, the process we go through, there'll be less This is exactly the kind of thing that I feel like the government doesn't want us to do anymore.
Or the
Yeah.
It's online.
yeah, and also the compensation thing, the
Yeah.
compensation issue that will become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so regulatory relief, as we know, if that progresses, there'll be even stringent requirements even with Indigenous plants and SNAs, as you know. So that's that. But for the NPSIB, the National Health Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity, that actually excluded quite a lot of exotic stuff, where you really need to provide a framework where you can, basically prove that there's enough mass, they're kind of contributing to ecological integrity, and they're working together with the Indigenous mass. So I think there's quite a lot of sort of details where, that you can kind of justify the exotic plantation, especially in Wanaka context, I think, because most of the flora and fauna is, people brought it, and they're proud of it, and that did a lot of good and all that. But and I think there's the private land ownership component. If we encourage private landowners to do such things, and then if we go and protect it later on, to say, hey, you actually can't develop your land, and your value of your land is going to drop. So we might not be making a lot of friends for no reason. So that's sort of the trade-offs.
And stay
Yeah.
there.
So-
Okay.
I can't keep the best friends ended up talking about one of the structures. That's okay.
Is Katrina, are you online? May not be.
Yes, I am.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, do you want to do this one? An update
Yeah,
on the
I'll pop through the natural hazards. So as Liz said, we've also started our natural hazard assessment. The output from this is to be able to undertake a risk assessment for the land, which could identify constraints on land that can't be developed for natural hazard reasons. So to get to that stage, to be able to do the risk assessment, we need to do data review and data collection to see what existing information is already there. And if there's not sufficient information already there, then we'll need to do some data collection afterwards. So that's what we've been working on in the first stage in this gap analysis. So the gap analysis for both Wanaka and Kirikiri Frankton has identified hazards that are present, but there's not sufficient information on them just now to be able to undertake the risk assessment. So these hazards for each area are listed on the slides. And we've just received the final report last week, which will enable us to go out for the next stage, which would be the data collection stage. So we would do further geotechnical investigations, further flood modelling to be able to get a bigger picture, and that would enable us to be able to do the risk assessment.
And I suppose this is an area that is strengthening the information, even with the reforms, we're seeing a bigger focus on understanding these types of hazards. And I think the NPS and the proposed regional policy statement, their requirements have been a significant step up to what we've previously had to do. So that, yeah, but in saying that, with Te Tapawai, we have a really good understanding of the natural hazards down there, which has been helpful right down to resource consents, but also when we're putting in our own infrastructure. Thanks, Katrina. Cam, did you want to? Oh, no, this is
Yeah, so this is just finishing up.
We should move on from there. Good stuff. Given my advices, but the Lake Tsunami and Seychelles with town centre to 3 parts, doesn't that leave out a whole lot of lakeside Wanaka? Is there a reason that or are they going to be more inclusive? That's just a label that's been attached to it.
Well, at the moment, the area that we've identified.
Oh, it's the area of the plan.
It's the area of influence.
Right.
And then Wanaka Town Centre. So yes,
So any research or modelling done will be applicable anywhere anyway. Thank you.
There is white work that has been going on in terms of the Lake Tsunami in particular. So I think that will have provided information to council about that. Yeah.
I think that's for more, I think there's some work for Queenstown happening in that space, but not Wanaka, because I don't think ORC is involved in that as well.
I think that's what was shared. No, you did, right? Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so engagement and next steps for where we're at in Wanaka. So we sent out 155 landowner letters just to those in the Wanaka South area a few weeks ago. I've only actually had a few emails and phone calls and site meetings that have come out of that. I suppose if I was to generalise about most of those discussions, anyone in the Wanaka South has probably not shown any particular willingness for land to be rezoned or developed in their particular lifetimes at this moment, though we know that can change.
Any more than it already is.
Yes. There was a meeting last week where the landowner was very keen that we think 100 years ahead, which I totally agree with. But the ideas that he had would be pretty much to protect most of Wanaka South, but in a kind of retain the land in private, but allow public kind of ownership. He's been having some conversations with the mayor and parks teams around how we could try and make that happen. So, yeah, some discussions in the background there. And then also some other meetings and emails with other landowners, not within the structure plan areas, just off to the side, some close to Mount Iron and off Riverbank Road, who would be keen to be part of the structure plan. So yeah, mixed conversations. Kind of theme is further out you go, less development wanted, closer into the Three Parks Town Centre. They'd be keen to be included even if they're not already.
Yeah, and then I think as well, some of the stuff beyond that is going to be a downstream effect from that, you know, like the connections over Valentine Road into Three Parks, that whole area, rec centres and all the other stuff that's going to be enabled. I'm aware we've got 15 minutes left and I completely derailed the first hour of this meeting, apologies. So happy if we stay super high level, super brief, just run over this so that we've given space for it, and then we can, yeah, just bring us.
Yeah, so this is just a priority slide, which again, hopefully you guys have looked at it. I won't go into too much detail, but we are looking at Wanaka over the next kind of 1 to 3 years. Are planning on using a citizens assembly as a form of engagement in the later stages, but we can't do that until we have all the technical information, and we are allowing around 18 months probably to get all that together. So we'll do some stuff in the background to keep everyone involved and to keep it ticking through, but the big stuff won't happen for another 18 months at least.
And did you want to have a quick summary of what's happening in Te Kerikeri, Frankton?
Yes, good afternoon, committee members. So just very, very briefly, last week we had a series of meetings with stakeholders and landowners in Frankton, especially around High School, Remarkables Park, and the other retail development. And thank you. I always get confused between that and Wanaka. So in 5 Mile, and that went really well in terms of understanding some of their issues. We also talked to the airport as well, and they raised some interesting issues around the contour moving forward. So it's something we need to look at in terms of future plans. We are sort of planning the next steps for engagement, which will probably be in about 9 weeks' time, when we do a more open workshop with a lot more people and get them all in a room and start figuring out what we need to do for Frankton. And we're still just testing and refining some strategic sort of options and looking at that list that you see in the working towards sort of getting the purpose and vision and starting to think about key moves and what spatial scenarios might be available for Frankton moving forward. So that'll all build up as part of the workshop in August.
Nice.
just skip this bit.
Yeah.
So the growth modelling system, I think most of you attended the full council workshop where we talked about this. So we've developed a model, and essentially what we're proposing is an upper and a higher limit for that growth modelling. So what we did is we approached Stats New Zealand and got a customised high projection, and we just projected out how we had grown. So that informs that blue line, and the green line is essentially our 2025 projections, which is now the Stats New Zealand high projections. So what we're proposing to do is use it as a range to help inform how we're growing. We've got some updated demand projections that we'll be releasing, and we work closely with our consultant who developed those to match where building consents have happened and capacity and developers' intentions. So we've refined that slightly. They're released, they're on their website. What we'll be doing is reporting every 6 months on these and looking at the growth areas and the settlements. And we also want to set up an interactive dashboard so that the public can go in and see what's happening, because particularly like electricity, NZTA, the schools, that sort of information is really helpful to them. But on top of that, we do have another system-wide approach, looking at a more enduring growth modelling system and looking at our partners. So Hamilton City, they have a really sophisticated growth modelling system. So just taking us on the journey to get, just to evolve in that space as we evolve from a small council to a bigger council, and also how we can work with the water entity and those types of people. So so lots is actually happening in this space, which is exciting.
What's important to note there, though, that more mature capability that Anita's describing won't be free to implement.
No.
And at the moment, it's not accounted for in the annual plan or LGP budgets, because we haven't got far enough to know what kind of future capability we'd be working towards there. But we will need to come and look at something around that, because there's technology requirements, but also specialist skills you need to be able to kind of get insights from data that the organisation doesn't have at the moment. But one of the, as Anita said, one of the key things here is how we integrate our growth, the kind of strategic growth and the land use planning side of it with the water entity, and then how we might use integrated data sets that we both inform to inform something like this. So there's a lot of thinking still to go on in this space, but we're already at a point where we really should have that capability. We should be developing that now, but because of the speed of growth, the type of growth, but so there's still quite a lot of thinking there.
Even the interim model that Kim's developed, we've built in jobs, housing, tourists, so even now we're getting a better feeling of what's happening and the implications of growth and what we're seeing. So I think that the critical thing is the monitoring of that, and then comparing it to what we've invested and what it means, and that's the critical thing.
Look at this straight line. Life is not like that.
No.
So, but you can't, going forward, you can't do any better than that. But I think whenever we're talking about this, it would probably be helpful to also have the revision mirror to see the bumpy road that got us to where we are now, which will indicate that when you take into account the global financial crisis and COVID, that there were huge decreases in significant decreases in population, and in particular visitor numbers. And because of that, population, and then in the case of GFC, a slow recovery, COVID, a hugely rapid recovery, and that will be true in the future. None of this will be smooth.
No.
There will be huge ups and downs. Who knows what else is going to happen? So when it gets back to communication, that we need to perhaps communicate better that it's not going to be like this. It's going to be more complex. And then, though, how do we attempt to manage that complexity? Which is actually our role.
I think it's a worthwhile investment. I think the opportunities in visual communication, because that's obviously what's going to be tangible. And my observation has been we need to gamify the planning. There's literally a PlayStation game called City Skylines, and you go and you build a road, and it shows, and I'm sure a lot of planners are picking up on it. When people are getting angry at the traffic, and that's essentially the North Star. having a model that you can go, well, here's the layer that shows just water infrastructure, here's the layer that shows the energy infrastructure, here's the transport layer, and then it's all interactive and multifaceted, puts it all into one place. I don't know if it's just that my algorithm has changed, but I'm now getting fed all these other different, companies around the world that are leveraging, AI and other smart technologies that have been able to facilitate this. It's only been a recent development. So I guess to signal, I think investment in that space is really crucial and a huge part of the tool that we need to better replicate. So, generally supportive and keen to, if you come back with that kind of stuff, to have a discussion about that.
Given the earlier discussions, then any exploration of new tech we're going to use, and surely we should be doing that on a regional level.
Yeah.
Because it's regional and more than just Otago. Because if we don't consider those other influences, we will never have a right. And it could also spread the cost as well.
Although one of the big differences between us and other parts of Otago, which is why you need to be able to have this sub-regional view in the regional spatial plan, is growth. Other than parts of central Otago, the others aren't growing at all.
But
they have different things they want to model and visualise, and
But I do think I am having conversations with local government New Zealand at the moment around how we can better share resource in terms of the future planning system and what's going to work for us. I mean, we end up being the pointy end of a problem. So we first adopted this first members, a lot of people are copying the Housing Trust in the same domain. Anyway, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good stuff.
So the regional spatial plan is just, obviously this has been dictated by the planning board, and just to highlight, there's work underway. So Councillor Tucker and Councillor Mitchell are now on the regional spatial planning committee, and we're hoping to get that first meeting booked in shortly. But what we just thought is we will set a program and then report. But obviously we just need to be a bit agile in this space, because we also potentially have a sub-regional deal part of this. So anyhow, we just be agile, but we will be using the Smart Growth Committee to test a lot of that and get direction. Okay, and then the housing plan. So
I think we've talked about the housing plan priorities already, haven't we?
And that's coming back to council.
We'll do a workshop with the trust, and then we'll delay the full council meeting as we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what we thought is the only thing that we wanted to do was really just highlight. We'll be doing deep dives into the live deeds. So we'll be bringing them back to councillors and discussing next steps, and we'll be doing that with legal. Just so that some of that might have to be done in public excluded.
Yeah.
And then the Lynch block.
So just highlighting the joint housing action plan itself will be being revised. That's one of the priorities.
Yeah. Oh, that's the next one, sorry. So we've got the Lynch block, and this has been considered by full council for future use of that site, and just Emily and myself are involved in that process. So that's just highlighting that. And then that's just, did you want to quickly run through that?
Yes, just as Ping just mentioned now, we are refreshing the JHAP as one of the priorities. We're looking at the indicators as we discussed at the monitoring report, and then looking at that sub-regional and wider focus. So that's the third key priority for this week.
Yeah, I see that's a transformation into the new system as well. It's a big part of it.
And then inclusionary housing, as you can see, it remains at the moment the best tool we've got available to secure perpetual affordable housing for our community. So we're not seeing that being delivered by anything else in the market at the moment.
So refresh the JHAP as an opportunity to
And what we'll be doing as part of that is working with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development on a bit more of a quantitative evidence base.
Insert now.
Insert now, yes.
So they've been included into that.
Oh, yeah, this July, yeah. On a bit more of a quantitative evidence base about the tools that we've been using, and whether they're not working or are working here and why not, and supporting the inclusionary housing. But so there's a process that we'll be starting with them as part of that process.
And so the efficacy, So this is probably the one that we wanted to talk about the most, but we've got 3 minutes. Yeah, but essentially, working collectively, so with Fiona's team and Honor and P&I too, it's across the council, you know, what could we do to provide the right amount, you know, the proposed approach to our advocacy. Now we produce those maps that show from a transport perspective.
Yeah.
And what we were thinking is we could really develop and grow that. I think one thing that we probably need to get a bit better at communicating is all our current zoning capacity. So we've got greenfield and infill, so we need to sort of visualise that. So working with Sarah and the urban designer, because she actually I gave her the fast track stuff and she put it like that. So she's a master at that. So just building on approaches like that. But what we know from our dealings with government officials is how do we say it in the least amount of words as possible with the biggest bang. So what we need is really visualise, highlight all the greenfield capacity, highlight all the infill capacity, but do it in a way that's not overwhelming and it's not lots and lots of wording on there.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity to be creative in that space.
Yeah.
I was reflecting on this union, and they had some fudge that they'd sent to politicians, and they were saying because of all the things that fudged, whatever else. But I was thinking, you know, creating a DC for central government and showing how much each house actually costs, and then, you know, handing them an invoice for what that's going to reflect on their balance sheet, or, you know, other aspects like that. I reflect that, you know, Councillor Mitchell is up in Wellington plenty of times for other things, whether or not we can utilise, you're quite involved in a lot of stuff, really appreciate. Just how we can, yeah.
Like try and separate them.
No, yeah. But it's more like, you know, I see you're quite active in those spaces, and I think that's a real asset to leverage. And, you know, so how can we support you in those environments with the information that you need to be having those face-to-face conversations, which are really hard to facilitate in other ways. But I think, as mentioned previously as well, like if we're trying to get everybody on the same page, create one page. So, you know, the tools that we invest in are going to heavily be swayed towards how do we tell all of this in the most simplistic, like, way possible, the quickest dynamic, which again is an art form. I appreciate.
Because what we're finding with this space is that we're providing a lot of information, having a lot of conversations, for example, through the regional deal. But what gets remembered is one slide from a, you know, infrastructure New Zealand presentation given by somebody 3 years ago. So, you know, that one slide gets remembered, whereas, you know, the evidence that is summarised in a really good quality policy-based paper, not so much.
Well, there was a reason I advocated for a chatbot that took all the council's documents, and, you know, because that is what large language models are for, is compiling evidence and then putting it in a digestible way that people can understand in their own language. So leveraging that is
so we've done multiple layers of detail. So part of it is also working out who you want to get the message to and how you make sure it's getting in front of them.
Yeah.
Because we've found that through these various discussions we're having is if you get to you think it's getting to a minister, but the minister doesn't get that. The minister gets this thing over here much later. And so actually, if the minister's the one we want to be targeting, how do you get the information in front of them?
Yeah.
And if it's not the minister, because actually the minister's view is being informed by this agency over here, which it didn't occur to us that agency over there would be giving the minister advice on that. So we were targeting this agency over here.
Yeah.
Like, how do we plan out how do we identify those pathways of who we're wanting to communicate with and getting the right level of information in front of them?
And I think, you know, from our perspective in planning development, we'll look after the regulatory side, and we're here listening today, because I think there is opportunity, you know, for Penny and her team and yourselves to then separately, as you say, Penny, go around the side of what, you know, we're putting into MCERT and stuff, and that's not necessarily getting straight to the minister. But there's nothing stopping lobbying outside of us and our regulatory process on the fast track.
As long as we're all telling the same story.
Yeah, we are.
Which is the same evidence.
At the moment, it's great.
Which we are.
Everyone's aligned. So but you're right. That's the only thing and that's partly why we're here listening today. But
I think that's
so I was just going to play on what Penny said. It's really important that this is why I think we are going to work really closely together, all of our teams, because what we want to do is because we every day look at the regulation. So for the referral stage, for instance, for fast track, it's absolutely the minister's criteria, and all of the minister's criteria is almost sifted through with the official's advice. and officials write that advice, and then
Yeah.
actually the minister doesn't see it.
Yeah.
So officials sift through all of the information that we've given to them, and that information needs to be top-notched and be back and forward with Penny's teams and other teams, so that we actually targeting the criteria, because they're really strict on looking at the criteria and possibly ignoring all of the things that are equally important and significant, but not putting into their briefing when they're briefing the minister and
Yeah.
providing all of those documents. And this is really critical to understand, because we will be like pouring our hearts out to say, hey, this isn't our structure plan, this is not in our spatial planning, this is not a plan development. No matter what we say, there is a possibility that it's not going to be heard.
Yeah. And I think
They're not even,
Yes,
yeah,
No,
yes,
but I
question
think-
out,
But I
yeah.
think that's where there's the two roles. We can do the
Yeah.
best we can, and I
Yes.
think there's the opportunity separately.
absolutely, yeah.
And I think it's not just us and not just councillors either, like who else are we partnered with in the community who can also, who might have better access to some of those people as well, like the Chamber or Destination Queenstown, or, you know, some of those other bodies and people that we work with that can be telling the same story.
Yeah, it's worth asking what's going to leave a lasting impression, to your point. We're dealing with ministers who have way too big of portfolios, and a few people who control everything. So I do think it's worthwhile being strategic. But in the same way, like, you know, there's if they had 5 hours, what they learn, if they had 5 minutes, and if they had 5 seconds, how can we tell that story in 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, to create a hierarchy of going?
Yeah.
There's always this analogy that if you design a cup for someone with a weak grip, you'll design a great cup for everybody. So if we make it for, I don't know, very product design specific one, but that's the same with, like, if you make it for the 2 seconds, if you make it for the uninterested, the uninformed, I think that's the focus priority. That'll in turn work with, you know, whoever else is in charge. So
I think one thing that's really come up is the network issue, and we raised that, and we've got some economic evidence to look at what is the impact economically of the increased traffic on our already congested system. So we're looking at ways to, you know, talk their language and say, well, actually, yes, maybe you might make 50 million here, but actually it's going to cost us 150 million because of the delays and the being stuck in traffic. So just looking at the tools available. So the only other two I just wanted to highlight to this committee is the accommodation supplement boundaries. Now, basically, I set a reminder in my calendar and email them regularly so we could be part of that process. We got contacted quite last minute to change the maps, and we were given the opportunity to amend the existing maps there and then, which we did. We did the best we could under the limits of that project. And what I raised in particular was, I said, look, our settlements aren't part of the urban areas, and they said, look, this is part of phase 1. So phase 1, they've just concentrated on our big urban areas like Jenks Point, you know, like Hayes Estate, the Mile and those types. I think Arrowtown was in there, big parts of Wanaka. But the settlements were left out, and I said, that's a massive issue for our community. And they said, look, it's not part of stage 1, they'll look at it in later stages. So what we have is our calendar reminder just to email them all the time. So they stalk them. And that's the only reason why I think they came to us with the other changes, because we had that. So just to know that that's a really top priority for us as a team, but also that National Short-Term Letting Register, we're involved with LGNZ, we were part of their submission. And so we look at every opportunity to be part of that, but looking at that short-term letting register, not just for registration, but looking for that long-term use if we ever get the opportunity to get a visitor levy, you know, but also the nights, the money that people are making, and just gathering that data so we can have, we have that evidence to back other policy and stuff.
Yeah, no, sadly, the tenacity is the key feature of getting things done. So,
If I can go back to that. So we see some of the fast track applications are including elements that are intended to get them through past the minister, which they don't intend to actually do. They're just including it because it looks like it meets the criteria. So similarly, I don't know where you've got this. So most of these fast track applications, there is not much opportunity for advocacy, at least not in a public way, because it's being kept largely secret, but there's nothing in the Act that requires them to be confidential. Is there?
I'll investigate that.
Well, because
Not
we've
on
got-
top of my head,
So-
actually, I'm not.
No, but we need to be careful there. So no, I don't know
Yeah,
about that.
We need to look at
Councillor
that, yeah.
Mitchell. I guess it'll be a risk assessment because as you've seen, the communications come back from MCERT and stuff, and they run the process, and we are just an affected party. And so I guess the risk aspect is like we pointed out. We just need to make sure we don't jeopardise ourselves.
No, the risk could be quite big actually.
Yeah.
But we have some fast track applicants like Kingston Village who are going, look, here's what we intend to do. What do you think?
Another one.
What can we do here? So some are very open. So and that is only sitting on the preference of the applicant. Apparently, they're saying, oh, we don't want it to be public. Well, that means that our ability to carry out our function as an affected party is inhibited because we can't have those conversations.
Well, except that I don't think that our role includes anything other than technical input on the things we are responsible for. So I think that's they're saying our role is not to get the community's view and reflect it.
So just to be clear, so the Minister MCERT, through both the COVID legislation and this one, have kept everything confidential. I don't think they can stop applicants choosing to do their own press releases if they're doing everything. And in fact, I think it got to a point where I think they ended up being told that they had to give the applicant a heads up that a decision was coming so that they could do a press release before it was someone else did something. But yeah, they have been consistent through that in terms of in fact, they've got a lot more. Actually, the EPA side of things, so once you're in the substantive, they're pretty much loading things onto the public website as it happens. It's that referral process that's very confidential.
Which is the part that involves the minister.
Yeah.
So the minister is involved after the approval of the referral. The actual substantive application is decided by the panel.
Yeah.
And that's a public process.
And run through the panel convener. Yeah, totally.
Does the minister, sorry, does the minister they take advice? Do they then make that decision on their own? Or if it's big enough, do they have to go back to cabinet? Is it sort of sitting in the cabinet secrecy space?
It's very confined. It's very confined. So, the Act outlines exactly how the minister needs to operate. So the officials give the advice to the minister. They prepare 2 briefings from memory, usually, and then they basically suggest the minister to either give the referral or decline the referral.
So it's the minister, not cabinet.
No,
Yeah,
but so
that's
that
the minister.
advice was multi-departmental, isn't it?
No,
Or just
actually, the ministry officials evaluate all of the
Just
information.
MCERT?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, and certain now. Yeah.
Thank you. Cool.
I appreciate we can be here all day talking about a whole bunch of things, and I appreciate the patience and the flexibility for doing that. I'll leave with you one final question. I hope that's great.
Well, just tell me if I'm wrong, because I've sort of been in the middle of this for the last 4 days, and you guys have been very, very helpful. This is a conversation with both David Walsh and John Glover. In terms of releasing information, and I've got legal advice, we can do so whenever we get it. However, the instruction from the ministry is if we do that, then submissions won't be considered. So there's sort of an element of tension with that. Do I have that correct?
Our submission.
No.
Submissions, not our submissions, but not our council's submissions.
So I don't know.
But for instance, adjacent neighbors, ratepayers, people who might be affected who have an opinion.
So I think
we don't play by the rules. So the rules are not legal. There's pressure.
Well, I think just so my understanding is, and I guess this is a place where we do take a cautious approach. So my experience to date has been that this whole process is quite evolving, in the sense that, particularly at the substantive stage, it's evolving on a daily basis in terms of how the panel convener and the panels are extrapolating the process out quite a bit from what the strict legislation writes. At that referral stage, we don't know what the risk, I guess, there is a risk that we will be jeopardised as a council in that process. Now, it's not in black and white legal advice to us that they won't consider our submissions or anything like that. But because no one's tested that, the risk is that is the implication. And so the question becomes, do we really want to take on that risk? Because the consequence of it could be very significant. And so from our perspective, we don't know of certainty. I don't know that yes, they will do that. But that is the risk that is sitting there, that is the unknown. And so it's the consequence of taking on that risk and then having that consequence occur and it being quite significant. So that's where we just have to advise caution around that, because it could, yeah.
Can I just,
But I'm not sure we've had any, there is no clear direction on what it is, but yeah.
I just want to thank everybody for being here, close it, stop the recording. And appreciate that, it's a bit looser. And I'll reflect on, what we wanted to get out of the workshops beforehand, but that was a lot of fun for me. So thanks so much for being around.
And we have another workshop planned where we're going to talk about fast track advocacy and, what we can do to support, these cumulative views and make sure we're focused in the right areas. I can't remember the date of it, but it's coming up soon.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.